All right, guys. Well, welcome to another week. Not much has changed since last week, but here we are again, and doesn't look like it's going to be any different this upcoming week. So I'm assuming that we will, as long as something major doesn't take place in the next few days, we'll be here this way tonight and again next Sunday night. Um, I'm ready for everything to go back to normal, as many of you probably are. I know things probably won't be normal, at least not the normal we're used to for a little bit longer. But I'm ready for the barber shop to open up. Um, I don't like my hair. I need my hair cut. So. Anyway, so tonight, guys, I'm starting a new. I don't really want to call it a series because it's probably only going to be just a couple weeks. But I'm definitely not going to cover everything tonight. I'm not going to keep you real long tonight, but I am starting kind of a new. We'll call it series for lack of a better term for now. But anyway, it's talking about the life of faith, a life of faith and adventure. And as Christians, that's exactly what we have: is a life of faith and a life of adventure. And so, tonight we're going to look at, we're going to talk about Jesus' call to the disciples and the trust that was required to follow him. And to lead into that, I wanted to share a different story of trust, and it's a true story. It took place in the mid 1800s, and it's about a man named Charles Blondin, and he was known for his. He was kind of a daredevil. He was known for his daring feats of bravery. And most particularly, anyway, he was known for his tightrope walking. And once I start telling you a little bit more about him, like I said, he's a daredevil. Some would say just completely stupid. I would probably put him in that category, but nonetheless, a daredevil. So, Charles Blondin, was most well known as the first person to walk across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. Now, this is said first person, so there's been some other crazies that has done it since him, but he was the first one. And but not only did he go across Niagara Falls on a tightrope one time, but he actually did it like close to like 300 times. And each time that he was a showman, and so every time he would cross, there was always crowds of people that would come watch him. I think I read the first time that he ever attempted it or did it, there was like some 25,000 people there. I mean, the crowds just gathered around to watch this dude walk on a tightrope across Niagara Falls. But each time he would cross, he would look at the crowd and say, "Hey, do you think I can do it again?" He was just that type of person. And so when it was all said and done over the course of his life, he did it about 300 times. And, believe it or not, of those 300 times, none of them resulted in his death. He lived to be like 70 something years old, and like died of diabetes or something like that. But wasn't from his daredevil attempts. But anyway, so after his first tightrope walk across Niagara Falls, he went on to cross it several more times. And each time that he did it, though, he would make it even more daring. He would do something different each time to make it more daring. He crossed it blindfolded at one point. He did it on stilts. And then even one time he strapped a cook stove, not like a big stove like you guys have in your kitchen today, but like just a cook stove. He strapped it onto his back, and about halfway across his tightrope, he stopped and made himself an omelet and ate it right there dangling over Niagara Falls, and even the point he even made some extra omelets and like lowered them down on a rope to some people on a boat below him. So not sure how good an omelet would be if it's cooked while you're hanging on a rope, but anyway, it was impressive nonetheless. And so, but another time, and the time I kind of want to focus on here tonight, Blondin decided that he was going to push a wheelbarrow across Niagara Falls. And, you know, they stretch the rope across the falls, and he takes the wheelbarrow. And if any of you have ever pushed a wheelbarrow, you know that them things aren't easy to keep straight on solid ground. So I can't imagine on a tightrope how hard that was, but he did it. And just like he always would, he gets to the other side, and he asked everybody, he says, "Hey, do you think I can do it again?" And they're like, the crowd's like, "Oh, yeah. So he got back on, and he pushed the wheelbarrow across a second time. So he went one way, now he's gone the other way. So now, again, he gets back over to the other side and looks at the crowd, and he says, do you think I can do it again?" And they're like, yeah. All these people, they like to see crazy. So they're like, "Yeah, you can do it again." And so he looks up at them, and he looks at the crowd. I'm sure they're cheering for him and all this, and it's loud. And he shouts out, and he says, "Can I have a volunteer to ride in the wheelbarrow?" Now, the story doesn't say this, but in my imagination, I'm going to think that the crowd probably got quiet real fast. No one was brave enough to get in the wheelbarrow. They just watched this dude roll this wheelbarrow across a tightrope over Niagara Falls twice, and now he's going to go the third time at their recommendation, that they're cheering and all that. But then when he asked for a volunteer, nobody's brave enough to do it. Now, that leads to the question of whether or not they really believed he could do it. I'm going to think they probably did believe that he could. They've already seen him do it. But I think the real problem was that the crowd, they loved to watch the adventure as long as they weren't part of the risk of that adventure. And so that, I thought that was a great story to lead into kind of what we're going to be talking about as far as living a life of faith and adventure. And throughout tonight and next week, and it might go into a third week, but throughout it, we're going to examine what it's like to live a life of faith and adventure by examining some really great adventures that the disciples went on, and more specifically, Peter. Now, in some stories, Peter is a lot like this Blondin guy. He's daring, he's adventurous. In his pursuit of Jesus, Peter's the one that was willing to step out of the boat and try to walk on the water. So Peter, he's kind of the daredevil himself as well, and so he's going to be a good example for us to use. But also, on the flip side of that, Peter's also, in some of his stories, he's a lot like the crowd. Standing on the sideline, he would stand on the sideline and he'd watch Jesus perform his feats and his skills, but sometimes afraid to step out on that tightrope. Peter was. And then you got the one case even that we talked about even last week in the Easter story, how Peter at one point was even scared into denying that he even knew Jesus. So Peter, he's going to be kind of both sides of it. He's going to be the daredevil. He's also the crowd. But I think if we truly look at ourselves, we will find that we're all a lot like Peter. Sometimes we have the faith it takes to step out on whatever tightrope is strung out in front of us or across our path. And then at other times, we let fear and anxiety keep us on the sidelines or hiding at home or whatever the case may be. We just don't always make that step out there. So hopefully you're ready to start off a new faith adventure. And so to get it started, it's true. Jesus invites each of us into an adventurous life of following him. That's great, you might say, but the question on most people's minds is the question of where they're going to be called to go and what they're going to be called to do. Many I know when I was a kid, for those of you that don't know, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a preacher. Me and my brothers and sisters and mom and dad, we traveled and we sang gospel music in churches and nursing homes and all of that. But even growing up in that, and that was an adventure in itself. But as I became older, I knew that there was probably a calling or an adventure that God had planned for me. But there was some fear in my mind of, well, if I pray for God to reveal that to me, is he going to send me off to some foreign country that where Christians are persecuted or Christians are actually killed, or where it's illegal to talk about Christ? And so just because of that fear, I wouldn't, as a young person, wouldn't pray that prayer because I was afraid of what was going to follow. And I think many Christian young people share that same feeling. They're afraid that following Jesus will mean that we have to leave all the comforts of home to be a missionary in some remote location. I mean, that's just that people think that. But the thing is, Jesus doesn't call everyone to be missionaries in Africa or China or wherever the case may be. He may call you to go across the globe. He may call you to go across the street. But no matter where he calls you, it's going to be an adventure of a lifetime. I mean, I've been called to be in the position I am now as a youth minister. I was called into the youth ministry several years ago, and it's been an adventure. I know a lot of people who've been called to go overseas to those foreign countries where things aren't as easy, and it's been an adventure for them. So no matter where he calls you, it's going to be an adventure. And Webster's dictionary defines the word adventure as an exciting or dangerous experience. I feel confident in saying that, when you get up to, when you're allowed to come to youth group or allowed to go to church service to worship, dangerous and exciting experiences are not exactly what you have in mind, right? But that's exactly what Jesus has in mind. And so, at this point you might be thinking, so hey, adventure, that's great and it's exciting, but it's not for everyone. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the home, mow the grass or do the dishes or whatever. We can't all be adventurous and neglect our responsibilities, right? And that's true to some extent. But regardless of what we do in life, we can find adventure in our faith in Jesus. In fact, I believe that it is our responsibility as a Christian to look for those adventures of faith, no matter what we're doing, no matter if we're, as adults, even when if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a construction worker or whatever the case may be, we still have a responsibility as Christians and as students. Even at school, you have that responsibility to look for the adventure of faith, no matter what you're doing. God made us for adventure. He made us to try new things. And I think if you search your soul deep down enough, that you'll feel that longing and desire for whatever adventure he has for you. I mean, think about it. Why do we love the movies? I mean, who doesn't love a good action-packed movie? We love that aspect of an adventure. Amusement parks, going on roller coasters. I'm not real fond of them anymore, but I used to be. But why did I like them? I liked the thrill of them. I liked the adventure of it. Haunted houses or a good rescue mission story. I mean, we like the adventure type environment. And so we do have that desire, and God created that desire in us. Now, I have no desire to get on a tightrope and walk across Niagara Falls like those other guys have, but to each his own. God gives he gives different desires to everybody. So in the story of the calling of the disciples, one of the first things that we're going to notice here is that each one of them was ready for the adventure of following Jesus. They dropped everything they were doing to go with Jesus. And so if you have a Bible, I'm going to highly encourage you to grab it just so you can read along with me. I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 4, And while you're getting there or getting your Bible, I'm just going to give you a quick little history on the book of Matthew. I think it's important to understand, our author and the background of a book that we're studying. So the author, Matthew, he was one of the 12 disciples. Prior to being a disciple, Matthew was a tax collector for the Roman government, which probably means he probably wasn't very popular. I mean, if you think about it in today's time, an IRS auditor, anybody that works for the IRS, really, I mean, they're not popular. And so, but back in his day, tax collectors, they were usually Jewish and were known for their dishonesty. They were known for extorting more money than what was actually due from their own people. So in other words, they were basically crooks. I mean, they were taking money that wasn't really owed to them and just basically taking advantage of people. So Matthew, he obviously had to have had a change of heart. He turned from a life of basically stealing money from people to sharing the news of Jesus. And as we look through the gospel, we're going to see that that while Matthew did have a change of heart, he didn't necessarily leave everything of his former life behind. A lot of people think, you got to leave everything behind. If you read through Matthew, you can still see some of his education and intellect still scattered out throughout the book. I mean, the book of Matthew actually makes more references to money than in any of the other books. The book of Matthew also takes a historical approach. You can kind of see, it is the first book of the New Testament, and so it has that lead-in where it's, it links the prophets of the Old Testament at the end of the Old Testament to the birth of Jesus. So it gives you that genealogy. If you're like me, once you've read that first chapter in Matthew, you probably might skip over it every time after that because it's all about, this person begat that person and then so on and so on. I mean, it's redundant, but nonetheless, it's important to understand that genealogy. And the book of Matthew also gives reference to some of the prophetic messages about the coming Messiah. So with that in mind, let's read Matthew chapter 4, and I'm going to read starting in verse 18. It says, "As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. 'Come, follow me,' Jesus said, 'and I will send you out to fish for people.' And at once they left their nets, and followed him. Going on from there," in verse 21, "going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him." So wow, you've got Peter and Andrew, and you got James and John. They were ready. They dropped everything to follow Jesus. No questions asked. They didn't say, "Well, where are we going?" They didn't do any of that. They just went. And I think it's it's important to probably notice what Jesus said here. Jesus said, "Come, follow me." This was more of a command than an invitation. Jesus didn't say, "Hey, I'm headed this way, and if you guys want to join me, you're more than welcome to." That's not what he said. He said, "Come, follow me." It was a command, and Jesus has called all of us to follow him. Now, he told them to come and follow so he could make them fishers of men. Jesus was telling them that he had a job for them to do, and it's time for them to get to it. Now, I do want to take a quick sidestep here to draw your attention to the phrase fishers of men. Now, some people like to say that Jesus used that phrase because the men he were calling were fishermen, and I'm sure there's probably some truth to that, but also, as I said a while ago, Matthew is full of references from the Old Testament. And so if we look back at Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 16, and I'm going to read the Message version of this. It says, "Now watch for what comes next. I'm going to assemble a bunch of fishermen. God's decree. They'll go fishing for my people." So basically be fishers of men. "And pull them in for judgment. Then I'll send out a party of hunters, and they'll hunt them out in all the mountains, hills, and caves. I'm watching their every move. I haven't lost track of a single one of them, neither them nor their sin." So even though I think these fishermen that Jesus is calling out, they may not be the most well versed, most well educated. They probably had a decent knowledge of what Jesus was referring to here, based on just maybe what they knew of the Old Testament, of being fishers of men. So Jesus not only putting his call into the vocabulary of his audience, but he's also calling them to be part of an important task of calling God's people back to him. He's saying, I'm going to make you fishers of men. You guys are going to help me draw my people back to me. So we look at James and John. They were fishermen. James and John were the ones that were with their father Zebedee. They're carrying on the family business of fishing. And when Jesus came to them, they were mending their nets. They were taking care of their nets. Probably means they were just getting ready. Maybe they just finished for the night and they were just getting the nets ready for the next night of fishing. But they dropped their nets and left everything behind. And this is not only, I don't think that's only symbolic. I mean, it's literally, they left everything. They're leaving their lives, their livelihood, and even their father. Their father there was there with them, Zebedee. And I don't know about you, but I know that if I left my dad in the middle of a job, or let's back up. Let's say I've got Xander and Braden with me, and we're carrying a big old dresser up a flight of stairs. And halfway up the stairs, Xander and Braden set their side down, and they're gone. I can probably tell you when I see them again, it's probably not going to end well for them. And it doesn't say really, if that was the case with James and John, it doesn't say, what Zebedee did once he saw him again. But I know in my case that wouldn't end well. But here's the thing: Jesus is calling us though to leave everything, just like he now as we've read, he's called Peter and Andrew, and he's called James and John. So he's got four of his disciples here. Now God doesn't necessarily call us to leave our parents stranded with the entire weight of a family business or whatever on their shoulders, but he is calling us just the same. I mean, he is calling us. Jesus' call to live a life of faithful adventure may not look like it did back then, but it doesn't mean that there isn't some risk and some uncertainty in what Jesus calls us to do. There are a lot of times where there's some risk or uncertainty in what he calls us to do. Sometimes Jesus calls us to share our faith with a friend at school, or maybe not even a friend, maybe somebody you don't ever talk to, and you have that, when you have that pulling, be like, oh, I need to tell this person about God. That can be a risk to you. That could be something uncertain. How are they going to receive you? Are they, especially if it's not if it is a friend, what are they going to say? If it's even an acquaintance, are they even going to listen to you? Maybe he has called you to go into the mission field. Maybe you've had that tugging of oh man, I'd like to go to Mexico or to China or wherever the case may be. There's so many places where you can be a missionary, even in our own United States, even in our own backyard. Or maybe you felt that tug just to help somebody less fortunate than you. Maybe you got an older person that lives 2 doors down from you that's not physically able to mow his lawn, and it's just something as simple as going over and helping somebody less fortunate. No matter what it is, there's risk involved in any and all things that we do, everything that we do in life. But we aren't always, I said all that to say, we're not always the most accurate predictors of what is risky. Some things that appear dangerous are actually much safer than we really think they are. Take, for example, flying in a commercial airplane. That's 30 times safer than driving in a car. And in fact, driving in a car is one of the most dangerous things that we can do, yet we do it every day without really even thinking about it. Yeah, you might be the best driver on the road, but what about every other driver that's around you? There's millions of them out there. We don't think about it because we have faith that we're going to get from point A to point B safely when we get in that car. And, did you even know that driving without letting the fear of what can happen keep you from doing it is faith. I said that weird. Do you know that driving without letting the fear of what can happen keep you from doing it is faith? So if that fear is not there, you have faith that you're going to get from one point to the next point. The Bible defines faith in Hebrews 11:1 as faith is to be sure of the things we hope for and to be certain of the things we cannot see. The disciples had faith. They hoped in Jesus, and they were certain of things that they could not see. They were certain that he would make them fishers of men. All he said to them so far is, "Come, follow me." They had to have faith that he was going to show them how. And that faith that's the lesson I want us to take from the disciples today. Most of us will probably never be asked to do something so dependent on faith as the disciples were. Some of us will be. Like going somewhere that's completely unknown. I mean, that takes a lot of faith. But most, like I said, most of us probably won't ever be asked to do something so dependent. But that's not really the point. The point is that we have the kind of faith that says God is ultimately in control of our lives. A quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." I mean, you think about it. Let's just say, pretend you're walking through a dark city that you don't know. Like you're in a city that you've never been to. You're walking through. It's the middle of the night. It's foggy, and you're walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, there's a step in front of you. And because of how dark and how foggy it is, you can't see beyond that first step. Are you going to take that staircase, not knowing what's on up in the fog? I think the staircase presents a good metaphor for life, because, if there is a staircase, it always leads somewhere, even if we can't see where that somewhere is. Then in real life, though, faith is taking those steps into the unknown and onto an invisible path. When you take a step up, say you take the staircase up in the fog, and each step you go, you're still going up, and eventually you're going to get to where that staircase leads. But each step you're taking it in faith, and so again, that's a good metaphor of how life is. Those steps sometimes are unknown, and we're on an invisible path. But giving up control to God, instead of trying to keep it to yourself, that's faith. So now, some of us, being in control is a major issue. We can't imagine not being in control of things. But what you do have to remember is that there isn't a whole lot in life that we actually can control. Control is pretty much an illusion. Ultimately, God is in control. He merely just gives us the choice to recognize and honor that control, or to attempt to control our own lives. But here's a hint on that. That rarely goes well, trying to control it ourselves. Faith is trusting that God will reveal our path to us. If we have that faith, He will. He's going to reveal our path to us each step that we take. He may not show us more than 2 or 3 steps ahead, if that much. But we have to have that faith that He will reveal it to us as we go. Jesus invites us to follow Him on a path. He invites us to follow Him on an adventure that may or may not be filled with risk and uncertainty. Sometimes He does. He calls people out to take risk and to an uncertain area. But if we do so with faith that God is in control, we're always going to be all right. We'll be all right because in Romans 8:31 it says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Today or tonight, I'm just asking what adventure is Jesus calling you to? Has there been a pooling, where you feel like you're supposed to go talk to somebody about Christ? Or maybe you haven't made that decision yet to follow Christ, and that's the pulling. Maybe that's the what He's calling you to be, and you're just scared to take risk because you don't know. And if that's the case, I encourage you to reach out to somebody that can help you. What adventure is Jesus calling you to? Back when I was a little kid, and you students that are listening to me, you may not even understand what I'm saying here, but whenever every Sunday we would have the Sunday newspaper. That was like the biggest newspaper of the week. Yeah, I know I'm old. Newspapers aren't around much, but there was always the comic section. And me and my brothers and sisters, we would always argue over who got to read the comic section first. Now, like every other day of the week of the newspaper, there was a comic section, but none of them was as good as the Sunday comic section. But anyway, so there was the one comic strip though that was always in there. It was called Family Circus, and it was like always kind of a bigger square, and usually just one frame, unlike some of the others that had several frames. But the creator of the Family Circus, he has a well-known quote that says, "Yesterday's the past, tomorrow's the future, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present." And I know it's a bit cheesy, but it's right. Each day we have is the present, and it's a gift. Every day we wake up, we get to decide what are we going to do with our gift of today. Every day you wake up, it's like God has gifted you that day, and He has a purpose for that day. And so every day we have to decide, am I going to be in control, or try to be in control, or am I going to give God control today of this gift that He's given me of today? And so, I want to just think about that. What will you do with your gift of today, each day? On what adventure will you follow Jesus today? In the morning, it'll be today, and that'll be another gift, a gift of that day. And each day you got to wake up and make that decision. What am I going to do with this gift He's given me today? Now, while there are times when our adventures are small and not particularly thrilling or exciting, we need to be careful that our daily task, our daily grind doesn't wear us down to the point that we think that the little things are the only adventures that God has for us to take. Sometimes He uses those little adventures to get you ready for the big adventure. He doesn't. I know that I used to hang out with some buddies a long time ago that went on mission trips, and I used to think that would be just awesome to go to other countries and all that. It's a little bit more scary now, but if God called me, that's what I would have to do. But back then, I know I would kind of live vicariously through them, and that's not what God meant for us to do. If He's calling you to be a missionary, He doesn't mean, for you to vicariously live through friends of yours that are going on mission trips. We can all have our own real life experiences with God. Sometimes those journeys lead us behind enemy lines, but those are voyages of faith. They can be expedition adventures with God. And the big thing to know is He's just waiting for you to say, "Let's go." He's already called us, just like He has told the four disciples that we've read about so far. He says, "Come follow me." He's told us the same thing. Come follow me. We've just got to make that decision to leave everything behind and follow Him and trust Him. And I meant to say, if you look up the word trust in the dictionary, it says a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. And when you're talking about Christ and putting trust in Christ, I would change one little word in that description that Webster has, and the word is "or." I would change it to "and." And I would say that trust in Jesus means to have a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, and strength of Christ. And so trust in Him, trust the adventure that He has set aside for you. It could be something big, it could be something right here in your own backyard. We just start listening to what He has for you. But the most important thing is to say, "Let's go." He's already said, "Follow me." It's time for you to say, "Let's go." And with that, I'm going to close, and we'll pick back up next week with more. Dear Lord, I thank You for Your word. I thank You for the many examples that you give us in your word of the adventures and the calling that you put on people's lives. I just pray that if there's anybody that's listening to me, Lord, that's been feeling that pull or that tug of doing something that's outside of their comfort zone, or it's maybe risky, or there's just some uncertainty about it, I just pray that you help them to act on it, Lord, and just to trust you, just to put their full trust in you, and know that you're going to lead them through it every step of the way. And I just pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, I encourage you to tune in next week as we continue on with this. I miss all these students. Can't wait for us to be able to get together again. Hopefully that's soon. It seems like they're trying to work that direction now. But nonetheless, you guys know how to get hold of me. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me or message me. And until then, I'll see you guys next week.